Welcome to the Book Flood Podcast. I am your host, Tom Nixon. My guest this week is Tom Bulber. Tom is a school librarian at Captain Elementary in the suburbs of St. Louis, Missouri, a 2018 Librarian Journal Mover and Shaker, former teacher in residence at the Library of Congress, and author of the books Literature and Primary Sources, Building News Literacy, as well as his first title, Elementary Educator's Guide to Primary Sources. He is a member of teacher advisory boards for the National Portrait Gallery and the American Archive of Public Broadcasting. Tom has written the picture books and primary sources posts for AASL's Knowledge Quest blog and hosted the Primary Source podcast. Tom also presents at conferences, runs workshops, and gives webinars to promote the use of primary sources in student learning. His foundation is built on over 20 years in public education as an elementary classroom teacher, educational technologist, and over 10 years as a school librarian. Welcome, Tom.
Glad to be here with you.
I had an epiphany last night as I was prepping for this, because I'm looking and I'm going, well, I know Tom is from Missouri. And I have to tell you, I was in Missouri last week.
What part?
I have a daughter who lives in St. Louis, and so I was there for about half the week, and then I'm going, I was literally a stone's throw from you, truly.
We could have chatted. We could have visited.
I know, that is so crazy. St. Louis is kind of a happening place. I had never been there until my daughter moved there. And I have two daughters and a son, and the two daughters live in Chicago and St. Louis. Both moved to the Midwest from California. I don't understand. But so let's go ahead and get started. Why don't we start with you describing your career path? How did you get to here?
So I started originally as an elementary school teacher. I taught fourth and fifth grade for about 6 years in two different districts, and knew from the time I was in high school that I was interested in going into teaching. And along the way, I really got into technology while I was in the classroom. And I thought, boy, if I move into a building-based technology role, I could really impact not just my 25 or so kids that I have every year, but I could, maybe impact the entire school on a yearly basis. And so I moved into that direction and did that for a number of years. But I really missed talking about books, and I missed working with literature in a lot of ways, but I still enjoyed kind of the technology and some of the research end of things, and libraries seemed to be a really natural fit for those things I was missing and the things I was still loving. And that brought me into a school library. I was lucky enough to have found myself in the building I'm at now in an educational technology support role at the building level. And as I was deciding to move into the librarian role, just so happened that the librarian here was retiring, and luckily I was able to stay in the same building because it is really a great place, great community to be in.
Nice. It's a wonderful thing when it's so fortuitous. When I went from being a classroom teacher to a librarian, it was much the same thing. I decided it was something I wanted to do, and then the person who had the job before had the good presence to leave.
Timing is everything.
It is. Your work is focused a lot on the importance of primary sources. Why is that so important to you and to librarians?
I think for me specifically, and this has not been my entire library career, but it's been a good portion of it at this point and will continue to be. It's really, primary sources are really a tool that I love bringing into student learning, because there's something that is not necessarily prepackaged. It doesn't have all the answers. There's some wonderful mystery around them. And when we have things that we can bring into students from outside of kind of the prepackaged school realm and invite students in to kind of wonder about them, to observe them, to react to them, there's something really authentic about that. And when we are able to take all of that and approach it with an inquiry-based approach, there's some real power to what students can do, and young as kindergarten all the way obviously up through high school and beyond. But there's just not a place where I think that it doesn't fit in throughout the school year, not necessarily in every subject or necessarily every unit, but boy, they play a really important role in what we do. And specifically as far as my role in the library is concerned, one reason that I really leaned heavily into them early on was because it was something that a lot of my classroom teachers weren't using at the elementary levels. And so I was able to come in and provide an expertise and provide a perspective, not only in accessing these materials, but also in helping teachers understand how students can benefit from their use. So it really, in some ways, kind of solidified a role that I played in my building. And I think that sometimes librarians struggle with that. You know, who am I, not as a person or even as a professional, but who am I amongst these other 40, 50, 80, 100 people in my building? How do I fit into this? And this was one way that I could fit very soundly into the building and even the district.
When I think primary sources, I tend to think more secondary, which probably I was an elementary teacher, but ended up being a secondary teacher librarian. Uh, are elementary librarians common in Missouri?
It really depends across the state. So they're not required as
Mm.
far as a state requirement. But we are, I'm part of the Missouri Association of School Librarians. And we are separate from our Missouri Library Association. We do a lot of work together, but we're a separate organization. That organization sits at over 900 members right now, if I remember correctly from our last conference we just had a week or so ago.
Mm.
And there are a lot of elementary librarians in that group. So it's not unusual to have elementary librarians across the state of Missouri, but you certainly see districts that maybe don't prioritize that and maybe don't have
Right.
elementary librarians or librarians that are spread across many elementary schools to a point where maybe they're not as effective. And then you have other pockets. Luckily, I'm in a district that fits this bill where elementary librarians are a priority in the staffing.
Nice. 900 for your professional association. Sadly, I'm not. CSLA, California School Library Association, is bigger, but not bigger by how much larger population we have.
Right. Per
That.
population, we're a very a good sized group. We've got a lot of people across the state, librarians across the state, who really find value in the state organization. And I'm thrilled about that. Just a few years ago now, actually, I think it was 3 years ago, we were the AASL chapter of the year. I've been lucky enough to have served and just am finishing up my role as past president, but served it for 4 years in executive council through the state organization. And it's a powerhouse. There's a lot of really incredible people through that organization, people who are just coming up that are coming in that are strong, and people that have been there a long time that are wonderful mentors, and everywhere in between. So it's a really great group of people.
Nice. You were a teacher in residence at the Library of Congress. How did that come about?
So that came about several years ago. Actually, it's been over 10 years now. I actually attended a summer teacher institute at the Library of Congress. They put these on every year. They look a little bit different now than they did then. But they come out, advertise them starting about January or February for the coming summer. And you can apply and you can attend one of these workshops. And I was hitting a certain point where this was really what I felt like I needed. I wasn't an expert by any stretch with regard to using primary sources in my teaching. And it was something that I was ready for in the library position. And I attended that. And one of the people putting on the session was at that time the current teacher in residence at the Library of Congress, and got an amazing amount of information and insight out of that experience. Was lucky enough to kind of finagle my way into attending a specialized summer teacher institute the following year. Usually that's not allowed, but I got myself in there. And again, there was another teacher in residence that next year. And by the time I had the opportunity to experience that first week, do a whole lot of work with my students that school year. By the time I was back the following summer, I thought maybe that teacher in residence opportunity would be something I'd be interested in and something I could contribute and also gain from. And so Rebecca Newland, who's still a good friend of mine, I asked her if we could chat. She was the teacher in residence then, and she graciously agreed. And it gave me the confidence to continue to work towards that. The next year, or that following calendar year, I applied and was accepted. And the 2015-2016 school year, I moved from St. Louis to Washington, D.C., and I worked with what was then called the Teacher Outreach Group. They have a different name now, but basically people at the library who work to promote the holdings that the library has to educators. And it was kind of like the best, if you can imagine kind of the best PD you've ever had, the kind that you get to think deeply about, and you get to then, you're thinking about while you're in the PD, boy, I can't wait to do this with my students or try that with my students. And you're kind of riffing and going off in different directions and just getting more and more excited. Think about doing that for basically an entire school year and then getting to come back to your students. I mean, it was just the most incredible gift that I could have received. And hopefully I like to think that I gave a decent amount back to the library and the people who follow it during the year I was there too. I did a lot of writing for them, some presenting, and then consulting, kind of working with individuals in the organization. And it was wonderful from an educator's point of view and I mentioned, I'm in a wonderful school. I'm in a wonderful district. I think we've all had that experience where maybe we feel like as an educator, as a professional, maybe our voice isn't as heard as much as we would want it to be. Right. I can say profoundly that year I was in DC at the Library of Congress, I don't know that I've ever felt more respected as an educator for this, entire big, long period of time, because I was one of the very few educators that were there, and they wanted to know what I thought, what my experiences were, what my perspectives were. So it was just great all around.
And your school district didn't have a problem with having you leave for a year?
So the way that it works with the Library of Congress specifically is essentially they buy out my teaching contract for a year. And so the district agrees to essentially keep me on as an employee for that year, and knowing that in agreement that I'll come back to my previous position as a librarian, and the district has an agreement to do that for 1 year anyway if you leave for whatever reason. And then I remained an employee of the district, and the Library of Congress essentially reimbursed the district for my employment, my expenses, my salary. So it was kind of a win-win all the way around, that the district gets someone who gains this expertise, and the library gains a perspective from me, and I gain from the whole experience itself. So it was a positive all the way around. And yeah, I can say that every administrator I spoke with from before I even applied, because obviously I needed to know that they would be supportive of it. Every administrator I spoke to was supportive from beginning to end. So again, a real gift, and it's a testament to the kind of district that I work in. They value educators going out and getting those types of experiences that are going to change who they are as professionals in a positive way.
Kudos to your district for sure, because it's not the same everywhere.
Absolutely, I do 100%.
So you have served on a couple teacher advisory boards. Tell us a little about that, and is that something you would recommend for others?
Yeah, so I'm on a teacher advisory board for the National Portrait Gallery, one of the Smithsonian Institute museums, and I'm also on the. I actually think the second one's called an educator advisory board, but basically the same thing, for the American Archive of Public Broadcasting, which is an online site that you can go to, and they have over 70 years of public radio, television, and radio, public television and radio from across the entire country. So local broadcasts, things that have been broadcast like across the entire country, like and some kind of outtake behind the scenes stuff as well. So, for example, with a lot of the Ted Burns documentaries that air on PBS stations, they have like the raw interview footage that's available for you, those types of things. And in both of those roles, essentially, I'm sitting with somewhere between 8, 10, 12 individuals who are educators or work for educators in different sense. So it might be it might be classroom teachers. It might be people who support educators through other organizations that are connected in spirit to what the main organization does. And I, again, come in as kind of an advisor, someone who provides a perspective, and then also potentially doing some kind of work that benefits from me having that perspective. So it might be for the National Portrait Gallery, creating and some educational material for teachers, or on occasion going out to DC and providing some professional development to educators at the Portrait Gallery, or sitting in on a Zoom meeting and looking at the some new resources and saying, well, from an educator standpoint, how could this be utilized, or where would this benefit teachers at what grade levels or what subject areas? Same thing for American Archive of Public Broadcasting. That same kind of work of how can we connect to educators? How can we promote our materials? And again, what materials are worth promoting? It's not a huge time commitment. I'd say the benefit to me is that, because if I'm going to do any kind of work at this point in my career, I always want there to be a benefit to me and my students, right? And so the benefit to me and my students and my teachers, for that sake, are going to be that I get this knowledge of material that maybe I wouldn't have otherwise, right? So I'm sitting on these advisory boards and I'm finding out some material that the Smithsonian has, or the American Archive of Public Broadcasting has, that maybe I wouldn't have found out otherwise. The benefit, hopefully, to them is that, again, I'm providing an expertise that they wouldn't have otherwise. And would I suggest it to someone else? Sure. I mean, I love it. And the way that those opportunities come about, at least for me, is just building relationships with institutions, right? Attending professional development, talking with individuals at conferences, all of those types of things, and just building that relationship. And sometimes things open up, and I was lucky enough with these two opportunities for something to open up and for me to come on and have those benefits that I just mentioned to you.
Your latest book, I believe it's your third book, Literature and Primary Sources: The Perfect Pairing. Tell us a little about that.
It is a co-written book, and it's actually with Rebecca Newland, who I mentioned earlier, that other former teacher in residence at the Library of Congress. This one, and I think this is my last book that I have in me, but I had written a couple of other books, but I had also been writing these blog posts for American Association of School Librarians that you mentioned, the picture books and primary source blog posts. And I had many people come up and say, "Oh, you should turn this into a book and basically, put it out in that way." And for that, the blog seemed to make a lot of sense. And I still occasionally put blog posts up there with that focus. But what really became clear through not only that work, but then also doing some work specifically with a group from the University of South Carolina around graphic novels and primary sources, and then doing some work in my district around middle grade novels and primary sources. There was just something more to be said around literature itself. And I had a really good grasp on the elementary aspects of it, or those elementary entry points of literature, and to some degree some of the middle school. But the high school, I was really I had no really great perspective, because I've done some work with high school social studies teachers, but not necessarily high school literature teachers, and it just wasn't an area where I excelled. But Rebecca has and continues to do amazing work at her high school with primary sources, as well as with poetry, which is another area that just escapes me. Poetry and primary sources, and she had done blog posts for one of the Library of Congress blogs for them, and had continued to do so for a number of years after she left that position. And so I talked with Rebecca, and I said, "Hey, I've got this idea. I don't know if you're into it, but I can't do it if you don't do it. Like this only works if we both are on board with something like this." And she was on board, and I pitched the book to my previous publisher, which was Libraries Unlimited, which now has merged with Bloomsbury. And they were gung-ho about it. And we took about a year or so, and we, hashed out the format of the book and how we were going to really focus our attention on things, and then wrote a couple of chapters together, and then wrote a lot of the chapters individually, and then just kind of reviewed chapters from each other. So it was really a great experience, because also that idea of writing, I find, and I came into that Library of Congress. I mentioned that I wrote with them. I never considered myself a writer before I worked with them. I considered myself a reader and a teacher, but I
Sure.
never considered myself a writer. That what I've come to find is through writing, blog posts and articles, and lucky enough to be able to write some books, is it just also gives me another opportunity to think so deeply about something, whether it's something that I've already done with my students and my teachers, or something that I want to do, that I just get this immersion in it that it benefits me professionally. And so I love the idea of writing in whatever format. I'm a big proponent of it now, more than I ever was, because of exactly that. I think it really has helped me professionally. And then lucky enough, I hopefully am able to write some stuff that goes out into the world and does some other people some good professionally as well.
So you're not working on another book now? This is the last one?
Unless lightning strikes somehow, this is this is the last one. No, I want to I'm kind of dabbling into getting back into more blog post writing. And to be honest with you, Tom, the other thing I've been doing for it's kind of for fun, but maybe it turns into something, is I've been writing essentially. A lot of my blog posts for AASL was based on historically based nonfiction picture books. And through doing all kinds of work with researching primary sources, I found all kinds of other stories, and I've actually started to write some of those picture books myself. Nothing that's out in the world or anything like that, but that's kind of my new immersion, is to do that kind of research and that kind of writing. And even though nothing's come of it yet, every year when my students are doing their nonfiction research and writing, you better believe that I've got something to share with them, because I've done this huge immersion into my own research and writing, and students resonate with that, because I'm, following interests of my own, and trying new things out with my writing, and I show them what I think doesn't work and what I'm struggling with, and it's a really neat teaching moment too.
Let's talk a little bit about book banning. Missouri has SB 778.
775.
I'm sorry,
Sorry.
775.
Yeah.
Uh, Tell us about that, what that is, and what librarians in your state are doing about it.
Yeah. So SB 775 came around a few years ago, in August, 3 years ago now. And it was, it's still around, is essentially, is a law that defines what they describe as explicit sexual material, and they give some description of that in the law, and essentially makes it illegal to have that in your library. Now, I don't want you, by just the term, to get overly concerned about what they describe, what the state describes as explicit sexual material, because what it has resulted in is hundreds of books, titles, probably thousands of books. I don't know where I'll really know the true impact, across the entire state, being moved off of library shelves, classroom shelves, those types of things. Targets, if you look at the types of books that have come off of shelves, you're going to see a lot of books in high schools that coming off of high school shelves, and a lot of books that are graphic novels that focus in on the LGBTQIA plus experience. I'm not for me to say that was intentional on the law's part, but that has been the result. Is that a lot of those books have come off. I mentioned earlier that I was part of the Missouri Association of School Librarians, and we felt that, and continue to feel that this is not what's right for students, because what they have done is taken age relevant and age appropriate books, and they've taken it. They've gotten a lot of those, several books that I mentioned removed off of library shelves. They've also done it in a way where, this isn't like your book challenges where there's a process
Right.
and a procedure in place, right? There was no process and procedure in place. There was a law that was put out, that was passed in August and widely found out about, or in July, excuse me, widely found out about in August. I believe those dates are correct. I could be a little off on that. And then school was starting weeks later. And so this was something that happened very quickly and continues to impact libraries across the state of Missouri. So MASL, the Missouri Association of School Librarians, along with MLA, Missouri Library Association, and the ACLU of Missouri, have filed a lawsuit against the state and said essentially that we feel like this law is unconstitutional, the way that it is written, and also unclear. And
Right.
that has resulted in books that should not be removed from shelves being removed from shelves. And it's dealt with wildly differently across the state, depending on what district you're in. I'm hoping in the next 6 to 12 months, because this has been going on for a long time, that we'll have an answer with this piece of litigation. But I don't know. We'll find out if it goes our way or if it doesn't. But there's been a lot of support coming from MASL and MLA and the ACLU. But you end up with a lot of librarians who are scared, because I mentioned earlier that it actually criminalizes doing this, so that we actually could have the librarian that's actually charged with the crime. And we don't, that has not happened, thank goodness. But even just the threat of that gets books removed from shelves, as you can imagine. Librarians concerned for their jobs and their livelihood, people who have families, and people who love their community and like working within it in the capacity that they do. There's people that, and so you can imagine books that are questioned, maybe not having the advocate that they normally do, because again, there's no process for this. There's simply the law itself. So that's where that sits. I don't know about you, Tom, and I know California looks different than Missouri for sure, but worrying about a state law and whether that was going to impact the book that I was able to put on a shelf or recommend to a student or whatever was never something that I was thinking about when I was getting my library degree. That kind of state impact on libraries and school libraries and public libraries, like we've seen in Missouri, is something that is kind of beyond anything I've seen here in the state before. But it certainly has rallied individuals to be more aware and at what's going on in the state level, and also more verbal, more willing at times when appropriate to let their voices be heard. And this seems to be, at least in Missouri, something that has been amplified, this idea of advocacy at the state level, advocacy as an organization, something that again looks way different than when I walked into my library the first time. It's just a different beast than it was then.
I can imagine that just having something like this on the books, if you are a new librarian, if you are in what is a conservative district, if you're in a school where the administrators are going to fold, for lack of a better term, you're pulling books off the shelf. Or you're not ordering certain books
That's it. Yes.
because sometimes life is too short.
Right.
Or at
And
least
this is, yeah, that's exactly the fear that we have, that MASL Executive Council was having, that leadership was having, and that we were hearing stories about. It was a scary time, continues to be a scary time. It's quieter now because, as you adeptly pointed out, what it more turns into at this point is just what's not going to get bought. What
Right.
stories are not going to be made available to students whose school library is the main source of literature. And so, yeah, I mean, it certainly is it's something that is, it became detrimental that the organization challenged that law, and the way for us to do that was through the court system.
So you talk a lot about advocacy. How do you approach advocacy, both state but also at your single school?
I think at the state level, there Massillon and Missouri Library Association have an advocacy day. We've luckily have people who are amazing at tracking different bills and going in and talking to and members going in and being kind of lined up to talk with leaders in the state level, House or Senate. I was lucky enough just a couple of weeks ago to attend American Library Association's fly-in. I was in D.C. talking with staff members of congressional leaders and talking about federal funding that is challenged now that's happening that I'm sure many of your listeners have heard about in the news. But when we talk about the school library, school level, district level, I think a lot of this comes down to a few things. One of them for me is relationships. Fostering relationships with community members, fostering relationships with administration, with staff members, and with students, and then also being very clear and being able to identify not only what libraries in general bring to all of those individuals and all of those groups, but also what you specifically as a librarian, what do you bring? Because like I mentioned earlier, I've got these areas of expertise that I've leaned into over the years because I saw needs and gaps. That in my mind makes, when you do that, when a librarian's able to do that, and I'm not saying it's always easy, and certainly it does take time, but I do think when librarians are able to do that it has a better chance of making you in your role more essential to what is happening throughout your building, throughout your district. I'm not saying I'm utilized in every capacity that I wish I was. There's still areas where I think maybe, I think I could be more utilized here or more utilized there. And those are still relationships and strengths of mine that I'm working on establishing across with those teachers or administrators or whoever it may be. But I do think that when I see that I'm a go-to person for certain things within my district that are things that I also value with regard to strengths that I bring to the role, I know that I've advocated in a certain way that makes me valuable to other people, makes the library valuable, makes the librarian valuable. And I think that that's, kind of an ever shifting target. We've got a new principal coming in next year. That's going to be a new experience for me, with, not that I haven't had a new principal, but with that particular individual, right? We've got a few new classroom teachers coming in. Those are going to be new experiences. And so that advocacy, and those relationships and helping people understand what you bring to the table while also continuing to strengthen yourself as an educator, as a professional, those are some things that are just kind of everlasting. Those don't go away, and when they do, that's problematic, right? That's when people don't realize what you bring to the table. That's when people
Right.
don't realize the power that the library holds, and when people don't realize how the power that library hold the power that the library holds, the library itself is less effective. I mean, it just is, and I hate to put that power in everyone else's hands. It's not entirely right. Obviously, a large portion of this is in the librarian's hands, but if and this is unfortunate, but when you've got your teachers don't see your benefit, your administrators don't see your benefit, your parents don't see your benefit, of course, this diminishes the impact that you're able to have. Can you still have an impact? Of course, absolutely, as long as your students are seeing that benefit that you bring. But when all these other groups, it's like you're playing this this three-dimensional chess game all the time. I feel like with trying to make sure that you're being important in the right ways to all the people. And that never looks the same, right? You're not important in the same way to students as you are to teachers, as you are to administrators, as you are to parents. And so it's really challenging, I think, to identify all those different ways and make those connections and communicate those pieces in effective ways that elevate you, that advocate for you, and the role that libraries play for everyone.
I always found as a librarian, in some ways, particularly with your own staff, you're a little bit Switzerland. You know, you have to remain neutral. You have to get along with everybody because you want to affect all the kids,
Right.
all the programs. Uh, People sometimes want you to take sides on things, and so that becomes a thing. But that's okay too.
This is true. This is true. Sometimes I do take a side on something. Sometimes it's the side
Right.
of the library, right? Sometimes the library has a side, but you're right. Like there's certainly in that relationship building, you've got to make those connections. And if you're, to your point, taking sides or getting sometimes involved in some of the things that happen in when a big group of professionals get around each other, if you get involved in some of that, it diminishes your effectiveness. And so, yeah, that is part of it as well. You're 100% right.
So, is there a book or a series of books from your childhood that still resonates with you?
Tom, I forgot you were going to ask those questions, but I do have an answer.
You did not read as a child. This is what
I
you're
did.
telling us.
You know what? I wasn't as much of a reader as a child as I am now, or at least don't really. I didn't, just like I maybe didn't consider myself a writer, like I mentioned earlier. As a child, I really didn't consider myself a reader. It's not that I didn't read, but I really didn't consider myself a reader until I got into high school. At the elementary level, which is where I'm based at now, I didn't consider myself a reader. Now, that being said, I did read. And there was a series when I was growing up, and this is going to date me, but these books actually predate me. But I was in a parochial school, and they probably didn't have money for new books, so they were old books in this library. But there was a series that was in their nonfiction section, and I'm not going to remember the name of the series, but essentially what it was that it looked at American leaders. Now, this is a lot of older white men, but not exclusively. And it essentially told their stories. Now, did it tell them correctly and accurately? No, because what it did was often invent dialogue and kind of and in some cases, I'm pretty sure invented situations that then essentially also gave a moral to the individual's story. So, for example, I remember specifically the story of John Hancock, and he was, as a kid, like always struggling with his writing, and in this particular tale, and practicing with it and what have you. And then, of course, you get to the point where he actually gets to write his name, the Big John Hancock, and all is worth it in the end. All that hard work, that stick to itiveness, but that idea of diving into history and kind of hearing about the past and connecting with the past was something that did stick with me. I mean, it sticks with me with the work I've done with primary sources. It sticks with me with the work that I do with my students, with like my own research and writing that I do, that I share with my students. That idea of looking at history and seeing how it can connect and relate to the present, I think, is something that I took from that, regardless of the fact that those were, they certainly had their faults, that particular series, but it is something that that still, it stuck with me for a long time and continues to stick with me. I was reading those books decades and decades ago and can still remember a handful of them fairly well.
What are you reading now?
What I am reading right now, I'm going to pull up my Sora app that I've got going on. So I'm reading two kind of groupings of things right now. I'm reading Peter Nimble and His Fantastic Eyes by Jonathan Auxier. There's a third book in that series that's coming out, which is I didn't even realize the grouping of books had a series name. I think when the first book came out, it wasn't a series, and then it was. But the series is called The Vanished Kingdom. I've had it in my library. I love Jonathan's other writing. Oh gosh, there's one on my shelf that is. Oh, it's got the name Sweep in it. I can't remember it right now, but it's about an ash created golem, that it kind of travels and helps this orphaned young girl, I believe. Which is a great book of his and others. But this particular series I had never picked up. I saw that the third book was coming out. And so I'm like, well, I'm going to go back and read this first book because I love Jonathan's work. So I'm reading that. He's continues to be a master in my eyes. So I love what I'm reading of his. I love this book so far. And the other groupings of books that I'm reading is I'm doing some work with a university out of Cincinnati, and they're creating a what will be a free curriculum of integrated language arts, science, and social studies. And I'm coming in and essentially looking at books that they have selected from the language arts point of view that relate also to the social studies. And I'm reading those books, which are all picture books at this point because I'm working with the kindergarten curriculum, and finding connected primary sources and then coming up with potential activities that I can suggest to them. So essentially I'm like consulting with this group, but it is like I'm headed to the library after our talk right now, to the public library, and picking up some more books that I'll be diving into the next couple of weeks that are going to be for that particular project. So not necessarily pleasure reading, but in some ways pleasurable because I enjoy the process of reading those books and just really diving in and seeing where those connections can be made with readers down the road.
Nice. And a good plug for both Sora and our local public library.
Absolutely. Love them both.
Yeah, me too. Thank you so much for coming on the podcast. For our listeners and viewers, please remember to like, subscribe, and share. And again, Tom, thank you so much. Greatly
Tom,
appreciate it.
great to talk to you. Thank you so much for having me.
Absolutely.